What time? Okay, should we start? Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Edible Education. It's wonderful to see you all this evening. I'm Will Rosenzweig, your guide this semester. And spring has officially arrived. We've got some beautiful weather. This is a photograph I took just the other day, or I think, the day before yesterday, of a Acer palmatum, a Japanese maple, in flower. I'll bet many of you didn't really know that almost all trees flower, and this is a very fleeting moment, but it reminded me that what Albert Einstein was purported to say, which was, look deep, deep into nature and you will understand everything better. So that photograph for me sort of summed up this moment of just extraordinary season. And tonight is a really special night to have in our midst Alice Waters and Bob Cannard, two of my heroes. I know for many of you, you're heroes as well. And the theme of tonight's conversation is about the chef-farmer partnership and the collaboration that ensues from that kind of commitment. But before we go further, I know some of you like the weekly news updates. So I knew Alice would really appreciate this, but this week the FDA actually approved the genetically engineered salmon for market. This photograph is a picture of two salmon, one that was grown naturally, and the other that is genetically modified, and they are the exact same age. So here's the challenge, is at this point in time, there is no legislation around labeling. It's undecided. There's a lot of controversy around this, but for those of you that are thinking about ways to take action, this could be a topic for you to pursue. Also this week, there were several really interesting reports. One was the discovery by the New York Times that the big tobacco industry actually used the same tactics that they used to market cigarettes for sugary sodas. And frankly, it worked. They were successful in hooking generations of children into loyal customers of soda and making those that consumption kind of habitual. At the same time, a study came out this week that's very credible, showing that sugar-sweetened drinks actually increase the risk of death. So these are really big public health issues. And in addition to that, the week before last, and I might have already mentioned this, but there's a study that came out of work done here at UC Berkeley showing that soda taxes actually work and that they reduce soda consumption in a dramatic way. One thing that was pointed out in the reports on those studies was while they are reducing immediate consumption in the area where the tax is enforced, they're actually watching people move into areas beyond the boundaries of the tax to still go to consume soda. So it's not foolproof, but it is working. The third piece of news I wanted to share with you was that earlier today, the Environmental Working Group came out with their Dirty Dozen and their Clean 15. These are the dozen most pesticide-laden crops, foods, and vegetables. What do you think is number one? You can read it up there. Strawberries. We had early detection on that, didn't we, a couple weeks ago when Dr. Julie Guthman was here. She talked all about how the strawberry industry is basically built on a system of chemical fumigation which was developed at none other than the University of California at Berkeley back in the 50s. So it's still a very, very high-risk product. Hopefully, many of you will change your purchasing decisions, or when you go to the farmer's market, ask about whether the strawberries are grown organically. And regrettably, this very popular vegetable, which has become mainstream, kale, has now joined the Dirty Dozen too. This is a really good report. It's free online. I really encourage you to get it, the EWG. The first page of the report is this little like cutout thing you put in your wallet or purse that you can shop with and guide you. So, you know, and I was thinking about last week with Samin and Shakira, and the source of their kind of inspiration has stayed with me all week. I was thinking about both of them, how just articulate and clear-headed they are, and they both demonstrated this personal capability of reflection. Did you notice this? For those of you that aren't in the class every week, this is a diagram that I've been sharing throughout the class because the theme of this year's class is take action. And this is kind of an entrepreneurial model of going from a source of curiosity to deep immersion to reflection, integration, and action. And I was really touched that I saw both of them modeling that cycle in their work. And I wrote down two things that I just wanted to share, maybe as a prompt for Alice and Bob too. But Shakira said just flat out, diversity is better. And I think, Bob, you could probably talk a lot to that as well, in the garden certainly and in the farm. And Samin said, the world I want to participate in doesn't exist yet. And that's why I need to work with others to create it. And she talked a lot about setting the table. And she also talked a lot about her influences. And one of her greatest sources of influence is Alice Waters. And another great source of influence and inspiration and mentorship has been Michael Pollan, the founding professor of this class. And it got me thinking about the ecosystems that we've been talking about. And Alice and Bob, who you're going to hear from tonight, they've effectively stimulated, encouraged, advanced an entire ecosystem of inspired people who have gone out and taken from their work and their values and their actions their own lives and livelihoods. And Samin's story of sort of stumbling into Chez Panisse, I think she said she started washing dishes initially, and then she finally got to cook. It just completely changed her life. And so I did a little research, you know, and this made me just want to reiterate to you something I said to you the first week of class. One thing leads to another. So I thought I'd show you this slide. This is an illustration from a PhD dissertation that was written about 8 years ago by a graduate student here at Berkeley named So Kim. She's now on the faculty at Stanford. But she did her entire thesis on the innovation ecosystem that emerged from Chez Panisse. And she identified all of these different actors, if you will, who have now gone out, thousands of people over 42 years. She did this when Chez Panisse was 42 years old, and showed how the influence of culinary artists, food journalists, food educators, and that's what really Samin and Shakira have become, and then everybody else in the ecosystem, the suppliers, the growers. And so it's a fascinating kind of energy and dynamic, and I wanted to set the stage for tonight's presentation to help you kind of understand the context of two people that have been working together in this very playful, dynamic, committed 40-year collaboration to effectively set the stage for what we enjoy now as the food movement. So without further ado, it gives me great honor and pleasure to introduce to you the person I think of as the standard bearer of the organic movement, Alice Waters.
Great Saturday. Thank you all for being here. I love this course, and I'm so glad that Will wanted to sort of host this in the business school, because we were very worried about the future of this course that began in the journalism school with Michael Pollan. And it's really gratifying that it has taken root. I was just noticing in that diagram that there weren't any farmers in that. And if you could imagine the number of farmers that have connected with restaurants and businesses because of their interest in getting organic and local food. So I'm going to begin with one slide. Oops. It's not quite the one I wanted, but it is at the university here and the Greek Theater. I went to school here. And I arrived in 1964. That's me, right up there, in a protest, Stop the War protest. But this is the picture I was really looking for, because this is Sproul Plaza. And when I came here, I was very naive, and I didn't know anything about what was really happening. And my friends said, well, we should go and find out. And I was so inspired by Mario Savio, who was the leader of the free speech movement. And I know you have a free speech cafe here on campus. But he really talked about how we could stop the war in Vietnam, how we could have free speech. He connected it to the civil rights movement. And he said that if we all worked together, that we could change the world. And I've never lost that hope. Never have lost it. It's just still inside me. And, oops. Am I doing this right? That's all at once. So I was empowered, and I wanted to stay in Berkeley. And I was teaching at the Montessori school in Berkeley. Wasn't a very successful teacher of 3 to 6 year olds. But I learned a lot about the pedagogy of Maria Montessori. And I loved it, because I never could learn by sitting in a class and listening to how you do math or science. But when I learned how to teach Montessori, we were out in nature picking leaves, and we were drawing the outline of the leaf and memorizing what it was. And I have never forgotten any of those trees that were in Hampstead in England when I went to school there. And I have never stopped thinking about learning by doing and the education of the senses. And that's what I applied when I first opened Chez Panisse. This is a picture of the dining room of Chez Panisse. It's still in the same house that it was started in 1971. And I made my first successful business decision by saying that I wanted to lease the building with an option to buy. Because my parents had loaned me money, they had mortgaged their house to give me money to do the start the restaurant with a couple of probably dope dealers too. But we made, I made that decision that if it didn't work, I could always have the money selling the house to pay back my parents. But that turned out to be the best decision I ever made, because we bought the building for, it was $32,000, but they took off all the improvements, and I bought it for $28,000 in 1971. And it allowed us to really survive for the first years when we really weren't making any money. We were a group of friends, and one of them's here in the room, first waitress, Sharon. But we were kind of a group of intellectual cooks, and we only wanted one menu, like in French restaurants that I had experienced when I went there for my junior year in college. And I loved the little tiny places where you would just go in and you would have a menu, and you always chose the restaurant you wanted to eat in by looking at the menu that was posted out front. And we have, for 47 years, been changing that menu every day. We have an upstairs cafe now that has an a la carte menu, but we do change that every day too, which is very important when you're thinking about waste, because we just order to the number of people that we're going to be serving. And something that was very important back in those first days of starting the restaurant were the values that I came to learn during the time of the free speech movement in Berkeley. And one of them was, don't go for the money. Don't run a business hoping, we all hope you're going to make money so that you can keep on doing it. But to make money, to run a business, to make money, was never, ever the intention of Chez Benny. We were interested in serving this meal that tasted so good that people would want to come back and eat it again. And we didn't know at the beginning how we were going to find those ingredients that tasted like those that I had tasted in France. And we were always on the search for ingredients. Now I don't. Oh, oops. How do I go back? There we are. We couldn't find them, so this is me and my backyard of my house in Berkeley. We planted the seeds from France in my backyard so that we could pick the salad that I wanted, the mesclun salad, and serve it at the restaurant. Those were some of the beginning things we did before we found Bob. And we had also a number of people in the neighborhood who had backyard gardens. And one woman had radishes, French breakfast radishes. And she would bring over a big basket of them, and we would make a trade. I'd give her lunch for two, and she'd give me this big basket of radishes. And the word got out. And it was really so sweet. Right at the beginning, this little German couple came into the restaurant, and they said, we have some special potatoes. And we hear that we could change it for 2 lunches. And of course, I fell for it. But I didn't know that those were a variety of potato that we would come to plant in the gardens of the fingerling potatoes, those little thin fingerling potatoes. And we had those very, very early on. But we used to go to the farm stands, drive out to Brentwood, and get corn. Or we went to Chinatown in San Francisco because they had ducks hanging, and it looked like they were like the ones in a French butcher shop. And we would bring those back in my old car in the trunk, and of course I had to abandon that car on the street corner because it smelled like, how should we say, aging duck. But those were all little experiments that we had in the search for taste. And my father and mother had moved from the East Coast and were in their retirement. And my father was so worried that I was running around looking for ingredients that he said, I'm going to find a farmer for you, and we will go to Davis and ask for all the organic farms that are within 1 hour of Chez Panisse. So for 6 months they had about 30 names. They ran around all of Northern California visiting farms. And they went to Bob Cannard's farm. And it's very, well, Bob can tell you the story from his side, but from my father's side, he was actually had some agricultural engineering experience in college, and he always loved to garden in our backyard. During the war, they had a victory garden, as everyone did as part of the war effort, and we never really went out to eat very often, very rarely, but we ate from that garden. And my mother canned applesauce and all sorts of things so that we had fruits and vegetables during the winter. But he felt like he had some real knowledge about farming. So he arrives at Bob's farm, and he looks around and he said, you know, where are the crops? Where are the neat rows? Where can I find the salad? And Bob took him on this adventure around the farm. And he ultimately made a presentation to the board of directors of Chez Panisse. And he said, I have 3 farms to recommend to you, but only one with a farmer who's crazy enough to work with you. And so began that relationship with Bob. And I think that, oops, there he is. And it has been an extraordinary experience because we have become what Carla Petrini of Slow Food would call co-producers of the meal. At first, I was bringing him all these seeds from around the world, all of these packages from France and Italy that I packed away in my suitcases and smuggled in. And I would give them to Bob and say, plant those. And now he says, this is what I have, cook this. And we listen, and we listen. And one of the really wonderful things that we've come to love, in fact, it's probably the most successful pizza that we've ever had at Chez Panisse, is one, it's made out of stinging nettles. It's a weed. It's a weed that you see every place. Not that really pointed jagger, not that one. The one that's sort of a softer leaf with little tiny thorns on it, and you have to use gloves and tongs when you're moving it around. But when it's cooked, it changes all of that. And it has such a great flavor. And we make pizzas out of it. And I have heard, and I'm sure Bob can confirm, it has incredibly high nutritional value. And so that was a real revelation, was learning how to cook what a farm could give you. And at first he told my father that his carrots were 10 times more nutritious than anybody else's carrots. And my father sort of laughed at that. But then to come find out that, in fact, it's the way that he nourishes the soil, which gives the nutrition to these carrots that make them so. And I learned something else, and maybe if you were in the class of Dan Barber when he spoke, he said that when fruits and vegetables are picked ripe, they have greater nutritional value. And I never really understood that. But you can imagine what's happening in the industrial food world that is bringing food everywhere from long distances that have to pick the fruit not ripe or the vegetables. And we're really, aside from the industrial aspect of it, the fact that it's not really ripe and from the vine, that the nutrition is less. So I think maybe, let's see, but I have a big pledge here that I want to talk to you about, but maybe after Bob talks, we'll talk at the Q&A about my pledge to the children and farmers of the state of California. We want to provide every child with a free, sustainable school lunch. And we want to buy the food directly from the people who grow it. So there's no middleman, and that farmer gets all the money. There's nobody taking the money. They're not having to sell their food, at a cut rate price to Whole Foods. We just pay them directly. And so that the values can come right through the cafeteria door, that stewardship and nourishment and community can come right in there. And so I have a master plan for the University of California, and we'll talk about it. So come up, Bob. Come up back. Okay. Thank you.
No. Well, that's something, isn't it? Well, I don't live in a world, like Samin said, that, it's not here yet. We got to make it. That's it. And that's what this lady was talking about, making it. And it isn't such an easy thing to change the land that we stand on, but we can do it. And we have been doing it. So where do we start? From my perspective, in the soil. You grow a physically complete plant, and that physically complete plant gets to manifest all of its inherent characteristics. A big chunk of its inherent characteristics are in its completeness is its immunological system. And to think that kale is on that list, a strong plant with a full immunological system. The only reason it's on that list is because it's being forced to grow. It hasn't been given a life of choice. And that's what you need to do in the garden. is grow the soil so that the plant can have a life of choice and allow itself to grow to achieve its own physical completeness. And once it achieves its own physical completeness, it's gonna have, I mean, only sick critters get bugs. No, you're sick. Is anybody not here, any of your classroom group today because they're sick? They're not here, they're sick, you know, like a sick plant, it gets bugs, we get bugs. It's a manifestation of weakness. We look out in our garden, and if you see disorder, such as pests, they call them pests, there really isn't any such thing as a pest. Bugs, small bugs, funguses, biology of every kind that wants to eat up your crop. Those are indicators, they're your friends, they're agents of mercy. They're telling you whether, if you observe, you pay attention, they're telling you whether your systems are in balance, they're telling you whether your crops have their physical completeness. And if they don't have physical completeness, they get bugs and they're weak and they're sick, and then the kale ends up on the nasty list. Ridiculous. You don't look at nature with an adversarial relationship and call things pests. You look at nature as it is and see sickness, and that is a sad thing. And so you need to feed your system towards physical completeness. And as you achieve physical completeness, you get the etheric sweetness that allows vegetables from that garden to enter to the hands of those chefs that get to bring that physical completeness to you. You know, in a breeding program, any kind of breeding program, a million breeding program, it's 3 generations of work before you get to begin to see in meaningful way the manifestations of your labors. And in my world, I want to grow physically complete food and feed it to the fetuses and allow the fetuses to come to maturity and feed it to their fetuses 3 cycles over. And if we were to do that, I think humanity might start being the organism that it has the potential to be, rather than like a snivelly little self-serving, greedy, oh, you know how we all live. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? Intellectually, we know how to behave, and then we go in another direction to satisfy our internalized hungers. So, not too difficult. What all comes from the soil. And, you know, plants are carnivores. Plants, they feed upon all of the biology of the soil, while they're at the same time feeding upon the sunlight and the compounds of the atmosphere and making sugars and other complex structures and pumping those complex structures into the soil. And plants grow and feed bacterias and algae and macropods of the soil, just like we grow chickens and cows and pigs. And plants absorb their protoplasm. In some cases, they absorb the whole organism. And that's where they get their nutrition. And they get their nutrition by and of choice. And that soil biology, it goes into the soil environment, and with its bodily wastes, it doesn't flush its bodily waste down the toilet for rejection. It uses its mild organic acids to acidulate or solubilize the mineral nutrients from the raw rock and bring those mineral nutrients, hundreds. Plants don't feed off of elements. This concept that humanity knows what an organism of a different order needs and wishes to feed and build its body with, it needs calcium, it needs zinc, it needs on. Ridiculous. Nobody uses elements, everybody uses compounds, mineral compounds, elements in conjunction with other elements. And those compounds form the catalysts of all life. The plants feed the bacteria and others acidulate and solubilize the rocks give up their minerals and those minerals move into the protoplasm of the soil life, and subsequently, as the cycle continues, into the plant life, and as the cycle continues back through other organisms' lives and into the soil. And what we do is shortchange all of those things with our intelligence and say that we know how this order of organisms other than ourselves needs to live and grow and what it needs to feed upon. And we make terrible mistakes. And because we make terrible mistakes, we grow hollow food. Our food today contains a very small percentage of essential minerals that it had even 100 years ago, when we still embraced natural cycles of the biosis of the soil to a much greater extent, even though we made many mistakes in agriculture. You grow a soil energetically speaking. We're the green revolution and we're feeding, we're supporting. Do you realize how many calories of energy we use to grow a very small amount of nutritional calories? Terribly wasteful, totally unsustainable. The only way that we can actually, they say that human effort is not, it's the only thing that is sustainable, is life effort. And so let's try to grow physically complete food. Why not? What's the problem? You grow physically complete food, you're going to end up with a much greater degree of nutritional soundness in your own bodies. And if you have nutritional soundness, most of our disorders, our internal disorders, mental and physically, are associated with shortfall, with disorders within our own internal biosis, and subsequently, we end up being sick. And so we have some perversions of the mind, and we have to hire the lawyers, or we have perversions of the digestive organs, and we have to hire the doctors. No, let's feed the system appropriately and require those a little less. And we make some motion towards, we have this great motion of being certified as an organic producer. Well, this is a step in the right direction, but it's just a beginning. We really need to learn to grow soil while we grow and feed people. We've gone around this world systematically as in our varied cultures, and we leave a wake of misery behind us for all the rest of nature, as attenuated by the Gobi Desert. We used to be a rainforest, the Sahara, the same. Our west coast here, the Baja, and all the way up to Santa Barbara, another rainforest zone. The Great Sonoran area, the Great Sonoran Desert from Mexico City all the way up to the San Juans. Denatured conditions. I come from Sonoma County. We used to have a temperate rainforest predominated by the redwood trees, and when our culture first came to these lands, and that went away rather quickly as the land opened up. At first, it was major summer rains still happened, and so we had great crops of raspberries, which transitioned as the summer rain stopped, to apples. And by 1972, the apples were decreed to have apple decline syndrome. So many disorders, but nutritional shortfall. Agricultural practices all for people and little or nothing for nature. And so it collapses. We end up with no more apples, and now we grow grapevines up in those regions, and 100 years ago you couldn't grow grapevines in most of that land because it was too rich and too moist and too cool. And so we step by step degrade a system, and it's only humanity that has the capacity to have the free will to do that degradationary work, but it's only humanity that has the free will and the capacity to make the auras of our planet increase rather than decrease. We have concerns of global climatic change. Well, if we're worried about global warming per se, let's cool down some hot spots on the planet. We've made these hot spots we call deserts very easy to cool them down. The land is still there. The sunlight is still there. The space, the air is still there with its carbon ready to be breathed in by plants to deposit its carbonaceous residue in the soil to feed soil biology, which begins to stabilize and bind soil particulate matters together, layer upon layer, to assume that we know any of it is kind of a ridiculous thing where we're part of it. We are here on this planet as an organism because of every other organism that's preceded us. What our physicality is an amalgamation of yeasts and molds and funguses and bacteria. In our mitochondria, our energy gathering and controlling small organs within all of our cells is directly evolutionarily a part of that system. And here's the mushroom, all of our circulatory systems allied with the physical linear systems of the yeasts and molds and fungal populations. Our cells are bacterials. Individual organs have amalgamated to form our lives, the lives of us, the lives of the skunk, the lives of the lizard, and everything that's preceded us. And we have this free will to take care of it all. And it's a very simple thing to do, to take care of it. Alice mentions about growing things. The reason I could grow food, and I gave up one of the loves of my life, selling directly to people that were going to get the food and make it and feed it to their families, to their children, farmers markets. I worked extensively in that business, and the kitchen comes to me and asks me to grow food, and it's a step away. I know, and not giving my food directly to you, who are going to get it and cook it and eat it yourselves, prepare it in however fashion you are. But it's been very much worth it, I'll tell you. Getting into the capacities of this entity that can reach out even deeper into the consciousness of humanity to bring the conceptualization of true nutrition to inspire the mental characteristics of humanity. Something that I really can't do. I like to be up in the mountains in the garden. So, I don't know where else to take you, to tell you the truth. What could we want but physical completeness? How do we achieve that? Well, it's really very simple. Leave nature alone, and it will achieve it unto itself. But help it along. Why not? We have the capacity to do that. We can help things along. Naturally, the rocks start big up in the mountains, and through the course of natural erosion, they tumble against each other and they break up, and they become liquefied in the tumult of motion from the mountain to the floodplain to the ocean. And all of the softer elements except silica, which is the quartz, the hardest element in common terms, which ends up as sand on the ocean beach, all of the softer elements are put into solution and suspension of the floodwater. And the land used to flood. Like, I live in the Sonoma Valley, and you look at the maps of 1866 and 72, and there's a swamp here and a swamp there and a swamp there, and there's no ditch. It's the creek. The creek is a swampy, floody, wet place. The people lived in the hills, and the valley floors were very rich and fertile and moist. And California was, quite frankly, for the most part, green until August. Humanity, our class of humanity, comes to California, and we say we've turned the San Joaquin from a desert into an oasis. Well, why do you think they called it Tulare County? It's a Tule County. It's the rivers there was a lake in the San Joaquin that ran from Bakersfield to Modesto, up the middle of the valley. It was a bountiful and rich and fertile place. And the nature conserves its mineral nutrition. The minerals that were ground up from the mountain flood out and bring new mineral tea, full spectrum ground up water soluble mineral tea to the land every year. And at the same time, all of the biology of the mountain, from the soils and from the manures, from the deers, the elks, whoever lives in the mountains, all erodes and goes in the tumult of the water. It is oxygenated, it's aerated, and the aerobic biology of soil digestion proliferates in that water. It's vital, it's rich, it's alive, and it gets new biological deposition as well. And the plants grow to maturity, and as they achieve maturity, the deer and the elk and the people come and eat the seeds from the plants. We do our best, but in organic agriculture, we talk about improving the soil with green manure cover crops, where we've prepared the ground and planted the seeds and allowed them to sprout until they're just coming into bloom. And at first bloom, you're supposed to come and incorporate them back into the soil. They're in a high nitrogen condition at this point. They rot down very quickly. They have a very quick hot burn to them. They produce a short burst of food stock for the soil biology. And then we go into a cycle of starvation. And if you're going to grow a soil or a population of any kind, you have to have a steady state food supply. You can't have lots of food one day and hungers the other day. You have to have a steady state circumstance. And so green manure cover cropping is kind of a form of plant infanticide, killing them at first bloom. It is like losing our daughters at a young age. No, allowing, nature doesn't have whole fields. All you have to do is observe. Nature doesn't have whole fields of plants coming to first bloom and dying. No, they come to maturity. The plant grows, it roots deep into the soil, harvesting mineral nutrients from as deep as it possibly can, absorbing as much atmospheric carbon as possible, translocating all of its mineral nutrients that it's accumulated, its protoplasm, its blood of life, to its seed baby populations, bringing it to physical completeness, that reproductive characteristic, draining ultimately its whole body and is turning brown, translocating everything to its seed population, and dying of contentment. Durable organic material that has a longer than 1 year half-life of digestion in a balanced, nutritional, temperate soil, and full reproductivity. It's like losing grandma at 98 years old. It's sad, but it's expected. The green manure crop, no. How are we ever going to grow the foundations of our life, which is soil, if we're losing its potential at a juvenile condition? We can't do it. It's just not going to happen. So we wanted to grow that carrot. And do we want a little baby carrot, or do we want a carrot that's mature? We want a food crop that's mature. You look at a squash, a zucchini, and it's immature until it's pollinated. It's a water body thing. Once it's pollinated, it develops aroma and depth of flavor and true characteristics. It absorbs, starts translocating, the plant starts translocating all of its mineral qualities, its nutritional qualities, its enzymatic qualities to make its seed babies towards the fruit. And after pollination, as it develops, it develops its nutritional soundness for us. Pretty simple. No. Do we grow our grain and allow it to come to its full natural maturity, or do we grow it and then spray some sort of herbicide over top of it to kill the plant and force early maturity to the grain? and then harvest that grain and then poison the blood of the people who eat the flour that's manufactured from that grain. I suppose it's all of our choice, and we've had that choice, and it's past time to exert the influences of other choices, from my perspective. And we can do it. We could do it. So with that, I think I'll say adieu.
Thank you, Bob and Alice. Victoria's got a couple of quick announcements. We'll come back to these slides. I'll give you this.
Clicker. Oh,
Yeah.
I feel so special. I never get the clicker.
You got the clicker.
I think you guys we're going to do Kahoot at the end, but I do have a couple other announcements that I will remember what they are. Weekly reading question. So I'm saying this now. I know 20 of you are going to email me in 2 weeks, but it's spring break. I get that, but the reading question for class 10 is due Sunday, March 31st. That is the Sunday before you return from spring break. Nobody's going to do this, but I highly recommend you just go do it now so then you won't forget, and then you won't have to email me that you forgot about it. Just throwing that out there. In follow-up to that wonderful presentation, we are going to do a farm visit on April 6th or 7th. I sent out a link yesterday. Please fill that out so we can figure out what date is best. Then details about the trip and sign up to the link will go out tomorrow or Friday. We're going to do a $10 commitment deposit that will be refunded after the trip or an appropriate cancellation. Essay 1, you guys did a great job. Me and the rest of the teaching team had a really fun time reading about how you're taking action. Really quickly, just for all of your reference, the mean was an 82, the median was an 84. That's great, so we're really excited about that. Some of you have already reached out, but just the general process, if you do have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and within 2 to 4-ish days, me or another member of the teaching team will get back to you. Please note that we will not be available during spring break. I actually had my last class that ended at 5, so I am on spring break right now. So I will be gone until the 31st. So we will respond to you very promptly after that. But yeah, if you have any questions, we're more than happy to chat with you about your essay, what could have been better, what was great about it, anything that you might want to talk about.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Victoria.
Yes.
Bob and Alice and Ross, could you join us up here? We'll have a little discussion. We've got some great questions from the students this week. Come on up.
Now, I should have introduced my son Ross. I'm retiring from the garden, and Ross is taking over.
Great. Thank you. Here. Can
Good.
I have a little bit more water? Thanks.
Well, thank you both for speaking from your heart and your hearts and from experience. I actually got my phone lit up while you were talking, and someone dear to me texted me and said, Alice is bringing me to tears.
Oh.
So, and Bob, you always bring me to tears. I have to relate a story because Bob, for those of you that know me, you know I've been sharing pictures of the garden all semester, and my garden mentor, I think probably a better word is shaman, is Bob Cannard, who I met back in, I can't remember, 1994 or 95. I had the good fortune at that time of working at a juice company called Odwalla, and we had a wonderful beverage that was made from carrots, and it was so popular we couldn't get enough carrots, and we found Bob. Bob was going to grow our carrots, and I started walking around with Bob and listening to the language and the way he saw the world, and it changed my life, I have to say. And one thing that happened was I had at that time about an 18-month-old daughter who was just getting her legs. And we took a tour up to your farm with some of my comrades at Odwalla to show them the system of how these carrots were going to come from the earth and end up in the bottle. And I happened to bring my little daughter along. And Bob talked a lot about the soil, but not only did he talk about it, we got in it. And one of the most memorable things was he said, and this is my compost pile. Remember, you presented it as if it was a monument. It was. And my daughter, who was standing between my legs, I remember she was just looking up, and she was just mesmerized by Bob's voice and this big mound of soil and hot manure, like steaming in front of her. And she took off from in front of me. She just ran right into the compost pile and face planted. Like it was a magnetic force that pulled her. And that was her inoculation. And she's now a gardener. So.
Well, I have to just interrupt because there was an incredible story when this Japanese designer, Eiko Ishioka, you might know of her, she's amazing, and she came to Chez Panisse, and she always wanted to know really deeply about what was going on. And when I talked about food, she said, I need to go see the farm. Remember when I brought Eiko up there? And I was so afraid because she was wearing a very fancy Ishimiyaki white dress, okay? And Bob took her out into the field in this white dress and searching for the vegetables. And at one point, I saw them way over there, and he had a handful of soil. And he said, I want you to taste it. And she did. And she came back really completely changed by that. I mean, it was like a revelation that put that in. That's what you did to Eiko.
Is that what he did to you too, Ross? Or?
Probably before I can remember.
Yes, that's what you must have some stories like that.
Yeah, Ross, why don't you introduce yourself just a little bit? One of the themes I think that we're interested in exploring is this kind of, generational transmission, and I think this group of people here are really interested in knowing sort of what it's like to approach farming now and at this age, and so it'd be wonderful for you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I might have I don't know, I feel like I have a strange worldview, kind of having been shaped by certain other people present. I don't know. I don't necessarily look at the world in the same way as others do. I have worked recently for several years in vineyard management, and it's always strange to talk to people who farm not organically, and it's really hard for me to understand how they approach the world, because it doesn't make any sense. But I guess the thing is, it's really easy in some ways, but it's really a completely different worldview, and there's no way for me to wrap my head around it really. I don't know. I kind of have heard various iterations of the talk you just heard for the last 36 years, and and it's so as I take over the original farm where I grew up, and as I see the kind of incredible thing that my dad has grown, he's created over the number of years. The farm was, before he took it over, it was a turkey farm, and I wasn't there to experience it, but he could tell you about how degraded and poorly managed it was, and well, it wasn't managed for soil. It was turkeys were run on it, and trucks were driven on it, and buildings were on it, and it was in pretty bad shape. And now it's pretty incredible, you know. He doesn't really believe in soil testing, and at least that's what my impression is. But one of the previous people who worked for him recently did some soil testing just to kind of see what things looked like, and it's kind of incredible. The soil organic matter is around 10%, and everything is in balance really well. And that has a lot to do with the fact that he's always obsessively focused on feeding, I don't want to say obsessively, but maybe, focused on feeding nature and feeding the soil. And you know, the farmers market customers and the restaurant are always important, but always come second to feeding the soil. And as I take things over, to me, the most important lesson that I've learned is that, you know, there are many little tweaks that I'm seeing that I might be able to make to get some more produce for the restaurant at this time or this time, and there's many little things that I might be able to do to improve little things here and there, but the most important thing for me to focus on is to keep that focus of nature first. And in some ways it's a luxury to be able to do that. You know, we have a certain amount of acreage, and we have the ability to, there's lots of farmers on really, really small farms that are trying to produce as much as they can to make a living. And we have the luxury to be able to devote a little bit of extra space so that we can focus on nature. And I realize that that's a luxury, but I realize also that it's kind of the most important thing, and that if it needs to be, it's something that needs to be focused on in our kind of food system, that you know, looking at the larger picture, if we expect our vegetables to be so cheap that we have to forget about the nature part of it, it's not going to work. You know, that you have to be able to, the farmer has to be able to focus on growing their soil as much as they focus on growing a crop. And if that doesn't work financially for the farmer, the system is broken. That's really a big problem. And so we're lucky enough to be in this incredible relationship with Chez Panisse that it works, you know, and we can do that, and we can focus on growing the soil and focus on this kind of incredible biodiversity, and it's an incredible blessing to be able to have that, you know. And I know there are people who have a harder life in that sense, you know, that aren't maybe not able, they have to rely more on inputs that are brought in. They have to try to pull more crop out of a smaller acreage. They have to focus obsessively on getting every little thing out of the bed. And we are able to, you know, let things get weedy and let things go to seed and let the cycle complete itself. And that's just the most important thing. So as I focus on, you know, going forward, making little changes here and there, and talking with the chefs and seeing exactly what they want and exactly how they like things and whatnot, that's the day-to-day of it, and that's a lot of fun. But the overarching thing is, how do I make sure that whatever changes I may make, how do I make sure that nature still gets at least half of what's going on?
And when Dan Barber was here, remember, he expressed this sort of responsibility for participating in that with the farmer, and even having his culinary agenda work to support that by, you know, creating rotation risotto and eating more of the farm and creating more dishes from plants that would normally just be biomass. And so I know you think a lot about that.
I do, and that's really the relationship we're trying to bring back, so that you can know the people that are growing and producing your food. And you can experience some of that in a farmer's market, and you can really support those people by going to that market to buy everything. Or you can do it much more quickly, I think, if you have an institution that has a lot of food needs and that you develop a network of people that you buy it from. And I just feel like at this moment of climate change that bringing the scraps from, just imagine the scraps from the University of California going back to the farmers that will practice regenerative agriculture, bringing that carbon back into the earth. I mean, we could do this. We could do this amazing, delicious sort of work. It's not work. It's like it's the most meaningful kind of job that I can have, is to have scraps from my kitchen and take them out into my compost heap. And you just feel like you're helping to address this issue of climate. And then you get to eat the food that comes from your garden. I mean, it's as I say, a delicious revolution. This isn't hard to do. But I guess the thing that I find so deeply rewarding is that connection that you have when you know the person, know the farmers, know the person who is raising those chickens, and you have that connection.
So how about some questions? We've got some great questions from the students, and if you have a question tonight, you're from the community, please come to one of the microphones here so that everybody can see. We may even have some questions from our online community that we're live streaming the class to, so we'll have Victoria come up in a minute. But Irina, are you here tonight? Irina, come up here. And Irina, as Irina comes down, I just want to also thank Irina because she sent Victoria and myself a note. She looked at her attendance on B courses, and she noticed that it didn't reflect her actual attendance. There was a couple of technical errors, and I just wanted to say thank you for doing that now, because that's the time to do it when you check it, not 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks after the course is over. So that's just a request to the rest of you that go in and check your attendance, make sure it reflects your understanding, and if it doesn't, send us a note. But Irina, you wrote a really great question to Alice today, so why don't you share that?
Thank you. Hi.
Tell us who you are and what you're studying. And
I am Irina. I'm a third-year public health and public policy graduate student studying health policy and management. And this is my second time taking this class, and I love it. The question is in regards to the edible schoolyard project. What is the current situation with getting the model of edible education for elementary and middle school children implemented outside of Berkeley? What kind of schools are starting to offer this type of curriculum? Is there space in public schools to provide this type of education? How scalable is this model? And do you anticipate seeing this being implemented on a more broad-based scale going forward? And if so, are there any state or federal policies that can further this curriculum?
so you got 8 questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's talk about edible school.
We'll let it go this time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Irina.
Well, let me tell you right now that the Edible Schoolyard Project started at Martin Luther King Junior Middle School here in Berkeley. There are 1,000 kids at that school. They speak 22 different languages at home. It was a very, it just happened by chance that we began the project there because the principal was wanting someone to beautify the grounds of the school. And he called me and asked me. And that's how it began. But I'd like to say that just from that project, there are on our website 6,500 schools around the world that have either kitchen and garden classrooms where they teach, all of the academic subjects. This isn't a garden per se in a school to teach gardening, or a kitchen to teach cooking. But instead, they are classrooms where all of the academic subjects can be learned, whether it be an art class, whether it be a science class, a language class in the kitchen. And so it's learning by doing. But people around the world are really wanting to connect children with nature and with food. And so these ideas are really, the scaling that's happening is happening because of the values that this program has expressed. And they are the values, the human values, as I said, of stewardship and nourishment and community. So how many questions did I answer just now? Well, what I'm thinking right now, and it's why I was talking about the pledge before, it takes a little time to start a garden in a school. And some schools, it's very difficult. And maybe you can start a garden in a lot that's nearby or on a roof of a school. You can always plant something or find a way to connect. But the easiest way to bring nature and nourishment into the school system, I really believe, is through the cafeteria door. Now, if we had an enlightened, and we do, superintendent of schools for the state of California right now, and we have an enlightened governor also, many representatives in this state, and if we decided to give every child a free, sustainable school lunch, it could really be the engine for a rural economy to develop. And we have, in fact, a program going in Stockton right now, where we had the mayor of that city said, I want every school in the district, 53 schools, to buy all of their food from local sustainable farms. And now we have the training that needs to happen. We need to imagine what food could be like. What if food were a part of academia? What if you were studying the Arabian Peninsula and you were eating a tabbouleh salad and some hummus and pita bread? And what if you were having a spicy carrot soup and that was your lunch and you were all sitting together and eating it? I think it would be digested deeply, not only the food, but the culture of that place. And we have ideas for what a school lunch could be if it really was not just about meat and about things that were made to be fast, cheap, and easy. What if they were really growing, brown rice, and that we were using that, and we were thinking of meat as a condiment, and we were using grains and beans and vegetables. And we taught children at a young age so they would grow up falling in love with real food. And that's the kind of edible education. That, let's see. Yes, we need to have that part of every curriculum. And I'm just dying to do a living, what do you call them, a dorm. And to think about how you could have a meal at dinner time together, where everybody ate together, something that was really nutritious and very inspiring.
Thank you.
Did I answer that?
You answered
Where
all
is she?
8. Yeah, you nailed it. There was a little question about scalability, but I wanted to just mention that you have this really amazing program where you teach the teachers how to teach the
Yes,
edible education.
we
So
do.
that's a strategy for how to expand the reach. And I know people come from all over the world to learn how to teach that. So that's a little bit of Irene's question. I'll be with you in just one second. I wanted to ask Bob and Ross, there's this whole kind of, there's a new interest stirring in becoming a farmer. There's like there's even a magazine, Modern Farmer, right? It's pretty amazing. But I guess I just wanted to have you take a moment to share like whatever advice you would have, like how do people enter that? How do they prepare? What are the best ways to join this movement and contribute to it?
I'm not sure I'm ideally placed to answer that, given that I joined it from birth. But I think my father will have something to say about that.
It's not new. I started teaching at the junior college in '71, and there were always 50 students in the class eager to grow plants. And in many cases, they were cannabis plants, but nonetheless, they had an interest in the structure of nature. And it does not matter what plant you grow. But
So you're the guy that trained all those people.
The interest, though, arises, like Ross was talking about him being polluted, perhaps, contaminated, some word like that. Yeah, he was fed, as I spoke earlier, from the garden in the womb, as well as his first experiences, his first nutrition came from a physically sound garden. And he's turned out like he can't understand toxic agriculture. Who really can, to tell you the truth? Are you growing food as food out of love for all of life, or are you growing food to make a handful of coin that you're going to leave behind when you become food for the soil again?
I've thought about that question because I think it's this insulation that we've developed. And that's why I think it's just so interesting, this kind of contact with the soil. It really is transformational. So,
You're crazy. You guys are crazy.
so you've got to go on this field trip. I mean, it's an amazing,
nature
it's
contact.
life-changing.
Developing social systems where we live within the embrace of nature. We have so many people within the urban structure of our culture today that are poorly adapted to the constraints of the systems that we have, where many of our peoples that are deranged in one fashion or another would be very happy helping. Humanity needs nature, and nature needs humanity. No question about it. Our forests need management. We've seen many fires burning. They need to be thinned. They need care. People were manufactured by life that preceded us so that we could help. And we have the capacity to help. We know how to help. All we have to do is set up a social system that allows us the life of being able to help nature become its own fullness.
Well, I have to say that I was inspired by a project at the San Francisco County Jail to start the Edible Schoolyard Project, because I went to visit 25 years ago Catherine Sneed, who was teaching the inmates to garden as therapy.
At Just Desserts.
Yes, well, that was a later project she had, but the first one was out of the jail. And they had a 7-acre garden. And she called me up and asked whether I would buy vegetables for Chez Panisse from the garden. And I said, well, I will. And she said, well, grown to your specification. I said, yes, of course. And she said, but you have to come out to the garden and meet my students. And I said, no, just send the vegetables. and she said, no, you must come meet them. So I went, and she said, come and tell Alice what this garden means to you. And I've told this story many times, and I have to tell it because it really, really was exactly what he said. I've only been in this garden for one day, and I shouldn't be saying anything. But it's been the best day of my life, okay? At that moment, I really understood that a garden can be transformational. So much so that they needed another garden when they were released from the jail. And that's the garden that Catherine planted in San Francisco behind Just Desserts, so that they would have a place to go when they left the jail. And they grew vegetables and sold them at the San Francisco Farmers Market. And some of them ended up in the Tree Corps, but none of them went back to jail. And I said, well, if you can do it in a jail, you can do it in a school. And now our schools are jails. How did this happen? And they've been industrialized like industrial farms.
I'm going to call on you. What's your name?
My name's Kevin Longa, and I'm a food documentary filmmaker.
Great. Hold on. Dina, are you here too tonight? You go over there to that mic, okay? And then, well, go ahead. Thank you.
It's actually funny that Sodexo company actually catered my schools back in the day, and they actually catered to prisons as well. Anyway, Ross, I had a question for you. You said that you can't really understand the mindset of a conventional, quote unquote, conventional farmer. I'm sure there's a lot of conventional farmers out there who could say quite the same about what you guys are doing. And what have you seen have been some great ways to bridge that divide, or have you been able to see that?
Well, in some ways it's a, sorry, forgot I had a microphone. In some ways it's a hard gap to bridge, you know, for a lot of, it's something that we need to work on breaking down, this barrier, because there's a lot of people who, I don't know. As I said, I can't get into their minds. You know, and I think it's, you know, they go to school, they go to Davis or something, and get taught about NPK and micronutrients, and that's kind of, you know, they're feeding the plant. They take a petiole sample and see what the plant needs, and then they give the plant those nutrients. And it's a mindset that I think when it comes down to it, the mindset is that humans know what the plant needs. And the reality, as my dad was saying, is that life on Earth is so complex. The natural systems are incredibly complex. We're not capable of wrapping our minds around them. It's absolutely impossible. The only way to properly feed a plant is to give it everything it could possibly desire, you know, and allow it to pick and choose, because how can we know what a plant actually needs? There are so many complex systems involved in the growing of a plant, you know. There are so many, and we're just starting to learn about kind of, you know, it's the same as in a human body. We're just starting to learn about our gut microbiome and how involved that is in human health. And it's the absolute same thing. The soil is the gut of the plant. And it's, in some ways, really a closed box. We are starting to learn about some of the microflora and microfauna in the soil, but it's such an impossible task, you know? Even with our kind of advanced scientific techniques that we have now, it's so impossibly complex that how are we going to know? The best thing that we can do is everything that we can do, and it's really hard to get to kind of break that mindset of a conventional grower, where they read the soil test, they apply the chemicals, you know, you apply the weed killer, and then you apply the chemicals that you want for your plant to grow, and it grows, and it produces something that looks superficially the same. And so that's kind of where, that's a part of the difficulty is, you know, using those conventional techniques, you can grow a bell pepper or something that is big and shiny and red. The fact is that when you taste it, it doesn't taste as good. And when you look at it carefully, it doesn't have the same nutritional value, but it looks more or less the same. And you can grow it cheaper and faster. And so you can make more money off of it. And so it's pretty hard to break that, you know? But
Well, I'll add a word. You bridge the gap. I've seen it many times. The conventional farmer poisons himself, gets cancers, and changes his way of action. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Ross. Yeah. Dina? Dina, tell us who you are.
I'm majoring in conservation and resource studies with a focus in agriculture and food systems. So this is sort of for Alice, but also for Bob and Ross. So the food scene has certainly changed a lot since you opened Chez Panisse in 1971, which I'm sure is partially because of the fact that you opened this restaurant. If you had been born into the current food scene and political climate, where would you be focusing your efforts? Would you still open Chez Panisse? What are some areas for change that you believe those of us just entering the food movement should address?
A lot of questions. Well, if I had been born in the current food scene and political climate, I think I would be doing exactly what I'm doing. Because I think falling in love with taste and ripeness leads you down a path. And you know, when I went to France that time, when I was 19, it was really a revelation to me. I went into a culture that cared about food and cared about being at the table with family and friends. They took 2 hours, kids took 2 hours to eat lunch. They went home with their family. You always went to the farmer's market. You would sometimes go twice a day in Paris. And it was always a gathering at the table and always people cooking at home. And it was just a richness of this culture and practicing those human values that were irresistible to me. And you know, when you tasted that fraise de bois or the baguette or the oyster right there alive on the half shell you ate, something that just came out of the water, you felt connected to that. And I just think we have become disconnected, but it's so easy to find it again. We think it's not because of the absolute indoctrination of a fast food culture in this country. We have been, just really indoctrinated from birth about fast, cheap, and easy, and affordability. I mean, food to be cheap. I mean, it's never been cheap throughout, except in this period of time, in the last 50 years. And normally people would spend much more of their income on it.
Well, and in the last period, I mean, in this sort of last technological wave of what's called innovation or disruption, we've really become, our expectations about instant gratification, having something now instantly, have become so pervasive and sort of a core value of what satisfaction looks like. And I think for me, being a gardener, that's completely incompatible with gardening. I mean, how many days does it take to grow a carrot? 60, 70 days, 80 days? It's not instant. And it's certainly not instant when you're feeding the soil. So I kind of think that part of recovering the reconnection is to examine the relationship to the value of instant gratification, convenience, having it tomorrow. Because in that process, all of the costs of that instant gratification are invisible right now. They're all pushed out. They're all pushed out onto others. And there's one question that comes up every time in this class for Alice, and Drew asked it tonight.
Yes.
Are you here, Drew? Yeah. Do you want to ask it, Drew, or do you want me to ask it for you, or come on and ask it? But this is the $1 million Alice question for edible education. Okay. And maybe we can talk a little bit about this, and also having the farmer perspective is helpful.
Hi, I'm Drew. I'm a third-year computer science student.
Say it again.
I'm a third-year computer science student.
Computer science. Okay, thanks.
So Chez Panisse is known for its fantastic quality and vibrant food, but it's also known to be quite expensive for the average diner. Is there a model where restaurants can source ingredients locally from responsible farmers while still keeping costs low enough to be accessible to all eaters?
So isn't this my favorite question?
This is your favorite question.
About
the cost of food and the true cost of food.
Well, I think really the issue is about knowing how to cook. I really, it all comes down to that. Because we have,
Yours isn't working anymore.
Mine isn't working anymore. But when you learn how to cook, you really can eat affordably, really affordably. You learn how to use all of the vegetable. So when you're using the chard, you're not cutting off those stems, you're cutting up those stems, you're sauteing it all together. And we have been basically told in this country by the fast food culture that it's too much trouble to cook. It's too expensive to buy organic food. That time is money. Takes too much time to go to the farmer's market. It's too much time to sit with your family and friends. But these are myths. Because one, it may take a little bit more time to go to that farmer's market. But when you have those ingredients at hand, it's very easy to cook a meal quickly. It really is, if you know how to cook. And cooking is not difficult, it's a great pleasure. And also shopping in the market, thank you, is a great pleasure. So I really recommend that people gather together at a house where you can cook together. We have also, the habit of assuming that the mother in the family is going to do all the cooking and all the cleaning up. And so when sort of fast food came into our lives, we just grabbed it because we didn't have deep roots in farming for flavor and in sitting at the table and eating for pleasure. So we got sold this idea that we didn't want it, and when in fact we can do this. We can do this. And it can be really affordable. Right now I'm writing a book about school lunch, and I'm creating plates of food that meet the criteria of organic, locally available, and affordable, under $2 a plate, nutritious, liked by all of us, I believe, particularly children, nutritious. Did I say easy to make? Easy to make. So I am, and culturally diverse. And so I'm really looking at what fits into that criteria. And I'm thinking about it seasonally. So summer, fall, winter, spring. And I'm making 10 plates of food that meet this criteria. And I'm testing them out on children in schools. And I'm testing them at Davis with the nutrition department to see whether they meet that criteria. But I'm finding out that the foods that meet this criteria are really the basic foods that most cultures have eaten for centuries, since the beginning of time, really. And they are, eating meat not as the main thing, but as a condiment. And eating grains, whole grains. Everything I'm using are whole grains. I've made some great pita bread that's whole wheat. And I want to use, all of the whole grains that are readily available to us now.
Do you have anything to
Well,
say?
before class, Alice showed me some pictures on her phone of these meals, and it made me hungry, and so. Beautiful, practical. $2 a plate. Actually, they were less than $2 a plate, but totally doable. What percentage of all of our vegetables, what percentage of your diet is vegetables, and how important is that? And how much of our land, our agricultural land, do we use to grow vegetables? Like 2 or 3%. We grow all of the vegetables on 2 or 3%. Nature is a bountiful supply. It's a matter of allowing it to come forth without external inputs, allowing it to come as we've all come, and transition it not for profit, but as a product of life, from one hand to another, allowing it to pass your palm without sticking on it. It's totally doable.
How about one more question tonight? Who's got a question? You're all satiated? Well, with that, I just want to...
And we've got one.
Oh, we have one. You have a question? Last but not least. There's no mic. Okay, talk loud. We'll repeat the question.
Okay. I'm on Will's Food Business School, Seth Gold, and I own Cafe Centro in the city. Firstly, Alice, your farm to school project, I want to get involved however I can. It's a subject very close to my heart, so however to start. Secondly, Bob and Rose, can you talk a little bit, very production methods, how you manage the balance between efficiency of cropping and creating the biodiversity that you need for improving soil?
Thank you.
I'll start, you can finish. Time-space sharing. You start out with a renewed piece of ground. You've allowed the nature crop to come to maturity as much as possible, and you've incorporated it back into the soil. So we have a clean slate to start with. And we introduce our crop. And at first, our crop needs to be managed so that it is not outcompeted by the nature support crop. And so at first, maybe its first half of its life, let's say, for this conversation, is all our crop getting established. So it's a little plot of land that's all planted to leeks or onions. And then at a certain stage of degree of maturity, the nature support crop, whether it is indigenous weeds or whether it's a planted nature support crop, such as buckwheat or clovers or whatever it may be, or a mixture, diversity is always beneficial. It's planted or it's allowed to come up, and as the leeks are ahead of it, the nature support crop comes up and maybe surpasses it. That forces the leeks to come up a little bit farther and a little bit brighter, and we end up with a crop of nice leeks, and alongside of it, because it's layered 50% of the time, is all the leek line, and the nature line is, instead of having one plot, let's say 1 acre of land, we basically shared half of that space for half of that, all of that space for half of the time, so we have 1.5 acres worth of productivity. The more you share, the more you will have to share.
Do you have anything to add, Ross?
I think you said it pretty well. I don't need to
Okay.
add anything.
Well, I think one of the desired outcomes or objectives for this class, of course, is for this group of students and communities to become enlightened eaters. And I think after tonight's presentation, it's quite clear that putting foot on a farm and getting down and touching the soil and better understanding this system firsthand is a critical step to that. And I just want to thank Alice and Bob and Ross for their good work, their consistency of what they put into the world, and probably most importantly, their generosity of spirit and goodwill for our collective edible education. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
Now, yes, we would for sure open that invitation that was on the board of coming to, as they said, Green String Farm, but if enough of you sign up, then what the original intent was to bring you to the Garden of Chez Panisse that Ross is now managing, which is Cannard Family Farm, as it's called today.
Okay, great. Cannard Family
And
Farm.
most welcome, and please do take the opportunity.
Thank you, Bob. You have the last word?
I wish I could take you all to Chez Panisse for dinner tonight.
Thank you. And Victoria will conduct Kahoot for those of you that are worried about your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
All right, people, please remember that you not only need to enter the game pin, but then you actually also need to answer the question. So don't just enter the pin and take off. I have a very exciting question for all of you, so would love to get your feedback.
I'm not in this class.
Okay.
We just got invited by someone, but
Wonderful.
we just wanted to know if you had an extra spot on the farm tour, if we could ever join. I don't know.